it would be it would be very dishonest for anyone to say that they were expecting these things to happen.
Okay.
I mean, everyone is surprised by everything that's happening. Everything is unpredictable in Egypt. So we had heard about the Tamarud campaign, a few months ago. They started this campaign to gather signatures. At first, when people were hearing about it, they didn't really take it seriously. They thought, okay, they're gathering signatures, it's nice, it'll apply some type of symbolic pressure. But when the demonstration finally took place on the 30th of June, on Sunday, 3 days ago now, the size and the number of people was really shocking to a lot of people. It was huge amounts, perhaps even more than during the 18 days that brought about the end of Mubarak's rule. So yes, it was a surprise. It was not predictable. It wasn't. What was also not predictable is the sense of disappointment that people are feeling towards the government and the Morsi's administration. I don't know how much people are aware in Italy about what the situation is like in Egypt, but there's
I don't think a lot.
Okay.
So.
Well, there's an acute fuel crisis now. Okay. According to everyone that I've spoken to, I've asked many people. This isn't my field. I'm not an economist, and I don't know much about fuel distribution. But it's very, very clear that there's a very acute fuel crisis. People are queuing up for hours, sometimes even longer, just to get some fuel in order to be able to work and transportation and in order to be able to deliver goods and so on and so forth. So there's a major problem, and it's getting worse. Okay. And it's affecting people's morale and their trust in government. And in addition to that, there's also now regular power outages in the city. So in my home, we have power outages, but they're happening in many other places more often than they're happening in my home. And I've asked many people about this, and apparently it's never been like this in the past. So people don't know what the reason is, but ultimately the blame must be put on the administration because they're in power. Okay, they blame sabotage and other things, right? But even if there is sabotage, they are responsible for discovering who's responsible for sabotage, and people are blaming them. So, and the lack of trust now is really reaching surprising proportions. It's all linked together, right? I mean, if the economic situation in Egypt had been excellent now and everyone was working and there was lots of economic growth, then perhaps people would have been more forgiving for the political and constitutional problems, okay? But the fact that there are very heavy political problems and very heavy constitutional problems mixed with economic problems is creating this potent recipe for rebellion or violence or this desire to change government now in Egypt. And what are these political and constitutional problems? They basically come from a mismanaged transition process, and everyone is involved in the mismanagement. It's not just the Brotherhood's fault; it's everyone's fault. But the Brotherhood gets the blame mostly because they're now in power. They have been in power for 1 year, so they have to assume responsibility for what's happening in the country. If there's a failure, then they are the first people to blame. However, it's not just them. It's all other parties are to blame. So, and those other parties include, of course, the former regime, because they are the ones that created these circumstances for these failures. Second of all, the military, because they are the ones that were administering Egypt for the first year and a half after the transition started. Okay, and they created a disastrous, a disastrous situation for everyone. Huge amounts of violence and repression and mismanagement of their own. Okay, of course, the Brotherhood, which has now been in power for 1 year. Okay, or I should say the FJP, the Freedom and Justice Party. And also the political opposition, the secular, liberal, left-wing opposition, which is disunited and doesn't have a united vision for an alternative to Morsi. They're very lucky because they have someone to argue against. Morsi is an easy target. Okay, but if they were to govern the country themselves today, it would be a surprise that if they could do a better job. It would be a surprise. Okay, maybe it would be just as bad. Maybe it would be a little bit better. Maybe a little bit worse. But it probably wouldn't be a huge difference, because these people are just not organized. They don't have a convincing platform. Okay, and so focusing on the Brotherhood, given that they've been in power for a year now, what are the political and constitutional problems that they've created? So they've exacerbated the lack of trust between the two sides. So we already did have a lack of trust from before. It's a very old problem, okay? So this chasm that exists between, the Islamists and the non-Islamists, right? This is a very old problem that predates the revolution, okay? And was made worse by the previous regime. The previous regime, focused on the Islamists and tried to make them this evil figure that everyone should be scared of, okay? So when the revolution took place, it was very easy and natural for many people to feel distrust towards the Islamists because that's the culture that they grew up in that was propagated by the previous regime, okay? But the Brotherhood themselves made it worse, okay? How did they make it worse? In part through the constitutional process, They decided to rush the constitutional process. At first they argued that they wanted to be a consensual process. They wanted everyone to be involved and everyone to draft the constitution together, and they wanted to make sure that everyone would be happy. By the end of the process, the 6 months drafting process, all of the opposition members had left, had abandoned the process, all of them. There wasn't a single one that was left, okay? It was just them finishing it on their own, okay? So they could have decided, well, listen, this isn't working, okay? Let's try to, come up with a new process to try to, reassure the other side that we're not going to dictate our vision of society. Instead, they decided to just finalize the text and impose it on the population, okay? And that was, in my view, a major mistake. Okay, well that's very hard to predict. Okay, but what I can
Let's
tell you,
try.
okay, we'll try, but I can start by saying what I think won't happen. Okay, so one of the things that won't happen is that the military will not return to administering the country like it did during the first year and a half, from February 2011 to June 2012. They won't do that because they realize, and everyone realizes, that that experience was terrible for the country. It was terrible for the country, and it was also terrible for the military. Their reputation declined markedly during that period, and they've been trying since they left, since June 2012. They've been trying to sort of rebuild their reputation, okay, and they don't want to ruin that now by retaking power as they did, and they've made that very clear. They've made it very clear that they do not want to engage in that type of thing. So a full military coup that would involve deposing the president and for the military to come back into power will almost definitely not happen.
Okay.
Almost definitely, unless there were to be a total breakdown, something unpredictable, But the military is trying to avoid that, and I think everyone wants to avoid that outcome. In my view, I don't think this is, I realize I'm in a minority here. I don't think everyone agrees with me. In my view, I don't think the military will force Morsi to leave office. I don't think they will. The reason why I say that is because it's a very different thing to force Morsi to leave office than to force Mubarak to leave office. It's totally different, Mubarak was a dictator, was in power for 3 decades, right? Was uniformly despised by almost everyone in Egypt, had almost no support in the country, okay? There weren't any pro-Mubarak demonstrations, that people remember, okay? He didn't have 20-30% of the population supporting him. In Egypt now, you have President Mohamed Morsi, okay, who is the first democratically elected president in the history of Egypt, from 7,000 years to today, okay? It's never happened before, okay? For the military now to step in and to remove this person from power would be a very, very bold move in this context, especially because not only was he democratically elected, according to the rules that were established, but on top of that, he still does have significant support in the country. We don't know exactly how much, a minority today, not a majority, but, something around 25-30%, we don't know exactly, but something like that, okay? Those people, many of them would not be very happy about this. They would feel that they are also being attacked as a result, okay? So it would also be another move to exacerbate the problem. If it was up to me, and it isn't up to me, and I'm not part of this debate at all, right? If it was up to me, I would try to find some type of middle ground, right? I would try to, I wouldn't depose the president because I just think that it would be an affront against the democratic process that took place last year, unless the president wishes to resign, and I doubt he would. But I would try to find some type of compromise solution that would, give trust in people that, that the country's administration would improve, right? Without at the same time, causing violence or causing, for huge disappointment in the Islamist camp as well,
Okay.
So I would try to find some type of middle ground. Perhaps it would be through the formation of a different type of government, you know, perhaps by dissolving the Shura Council, because the Shura Council, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's the Shura Council is the acting parliament. It was elected originally just to be a council of advisors. So it was elected to be a council of advisors with no real power. Now, the constitution that was passed in December 2012 granted it temporary legislative authority, okay, just for the interim period, okay. So it's a very illegitimate body because almost no one participated in the elections of that body, okay. Only 8% of the population participated. And also those people who participated in that participated on the basis that they would have no power, okay. Now they've been given full legislative authority and they're contemplating, you know, changing lots of important things in the country, okay. So it has very, very little legitimacy. So dissolving it, in my view, would not be a huge affront against democracy, I think, okay. So it might be that type of thing might be a good type of compromise in this very bad situation, you know. But, you know, I doubt that deposing the president would be a good solution. Best people to ask would be to ask them, right? They would be able to tell you.
Yeah.
But also,
But they haven't leaders now. So.
That's right. Okay. So, and the fact that they don't have leaders, that it's a grassroots campaign, means that they'll want different things depending on who you speak to. They'll have different views. There are millions of them, as you say, right? Huge amounts of people were on the streets on Sunday. We don't know exactly how many, but millions certainly, right? And you know, some of those people will want for the president to resign. Some of them, others will also want just to apply pressure on the president and put pressure on the political system to improve their performance. You know, some of them will want the military to intervene. You know, each you know, there'll be categories of people. You know, in the days leading up to the demonstration, I was speaking to many people, asking them what they thought would happen or what they wanted to happen. Right. Some of them said, you know, I'm going to go to the demonstration, but I don't think once he will leave, you know, I think that he's going to stay until 2016.
Okay.
You know, but we need to show him that, you know, we're boss, that it's up to us, it's not up to him. You know, so other people were determined that he should resign. You know, if he doesn't resign, I don't think it means that the campaign will continue necessarily. You know, if they feel that their general objective has been satisfied, because this the act of removing Mursi is not an end. Okay. You know, the end is for the situation of the country to improve, okay, economically, politically, socially, you know, constitutionally, legally, right? So Mursi, maybe he's an impediment, maybe he'll prevent that no matter what. But, you know, I'm hoping that there could be some type of solution whereby he would stay, because in the end, you know, I'm not a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, you know, and I'm not entitled to have an opinion about what happens internally within Egypt, but he was elected in a relatively democratic process. Okay. And that's an important factor that people always need to remember. You know, going against that is a major endeavor. You know, it's very different to forcing Mubarak to resign. It should be an internal issue, and I hope that it will be. I don't think that anyone, you know, I think a good advice is always welcome. Okay. But that's it. You know, in my view, this is something that Egypt needs to resolve on its own.